Hi, everyone. Welcome once again to our webinar. I'm Jim Gordon. I'm the founder and executive director of the Center for Mind-Body Medicine. And I'm very happy to welcome my dear friend and often host when I'm in the Berkshires, Aviva Ram, who's a wonderful physician, one of our country's leading experts on issues related to women's health. And we're going to be talking with Aviva about her new book, Hormone Intelligence, and about many other concerns and issues related to women's health and a current crisis, the current COVID precipitated crisis, which is affecting women's health in very significant ways. But first, let's sit together and breathe together as we always do. Aviva, it's good to be here breathing with you and relaxing with you.
Same here. Always wonderful, my friend.
So we're just going to sit and relax and close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. And let your breathing deepen. Remember, everyone, this soft belly breathing that we're going to be doing, this is a concentrated meditation. So we're concentrating on focusing on the breath coming in through our nose and out through our mouth, on our bellies softening and relaxing as we exhale, and on the word soft as we breathe in and belly as we breathe out. Relaxing a little more with each exhalation. Feeling your whole body relax. If thoughts come, let them come. Notice them. Let them go. Gently bring your mind back to soft belly. Just a couple more slow, deep, soft belly breaths. Now let's open our eyes, let our attention come back in the room, on the screen. Hi again. Hi, Aviva. Hi, everyone. So Aviva Ram is with me today. Aviva is a Yale-trained physician who is a prolific writer. She's a teacher. She's a practicing physician. And she's been very involved with issues related to women's health for many, many years. And we're going to focus some on her new book, Hormone Intelligence, which puts together so much of what she has learned and practiced and used with others and taught to her students over the last 30, 35 years. But first, Aviva, welcome, and tell everyone a little bit about who is Aviva Ram and how did you get to be who you are, because I think it's very interesting. Your work is inspiring in many ways, and so is your, wouldn't even call it a career path, so is your life path. I think especially to young people who are wondering who they are, where they're going, and how they can be of use in the world. So tell me, and tell all of us a little bit about how you got to be who you are. Where'd you come from, and where you been?
Yeah, so I think that, especially I'm almost 55, the reflection on who I am is such a profound one and a deep one. And the older I get, the more I look back and realize there's some combination, I think, of we're almost born who we are, and then life cultivates aspects of that. And from the earliest I can remember, and I have memories that go back to under 2 years old that I can verify with my family. I was actually reading by the time I was 2. Multiple family members verify that. So it was always a little bit ahead of the curve. I was born 6 weeks early. So my mom has been telling me I was ahead of the curve since I was a little kid. Always a very deep interest in science, a deep interest in the world around me, and a deep interest in words. So it's not surprising in so many ways that my work has followed a very sort of clean path from how I was from a tiny, tiny child to now. I also, as a child, loved to entertain my family. I did impersonations. I was in plays. And in many ways, teaching, when I allow myself to really get into it, I can realize I can tap into that thespian quality in communicating and reading an audience and tailoring myself to that audience. My childhood also involved a fair amount of trauma. I have a very high ACE score, adverse childhood event score. My parents had a violent marriage. My mom describes her first romantic encounter with my dad as violent, and it didn't stop there. I grew up in a housing project in New York City and also experienced bullying as largely a result of being a smart kid in my class. So there was a fair amount of being followed home by groups and being pushed around. But I also within that, there was a small cadre of superhero friends who would gather around me and walk me home and say, be who you are. And the constellation of all of this, in some ways, I think led me to leave home very early. I left home when I was 15 to college, which meant I had already applied when I was 14. So I was living at this point in a housing project, tiny 2-bedroom apartment in a bunk bed with my younger brother. We had our own bunks, obviously, but tiny bedroom with a bunk bed till I was 14 or 15 and left home. And for me, the ability to communicate well, to be a high achiever in school, science fairs, spelling bees, these kind of things, allowed me to apply to college so young and leave home so young. And I think that for me, the combination of still having that deep, passionate love of science and communication and the experience of having been bullied has led me to be a very, very much an activist and fighter for when people don't have a voice or are being mistreated in a situation. So one example that I think possibly says who I am, maybe more than anything, is I had a pregnant mom that I was midwifing. She actually came to me to be her midwife, but she was very, very high risk, had serious prenatal complications, so she couldn't have a home birth. But I agreed to go to the hospital with her, and she had many, many interventions throughout the pregnancy, and it was not the pregnancy that she wanted because of these complications. So when she was in labor, her labor was very straightforward in the hospital, and I was there as a doula to support her. And it was time for her to push the baby out, and she didn't want to have an episiotomy where the doctor cuts the perineum to create more space for the baby to come out. And the doctor picked up the scissors to do the episiotomy. And I looked at him and I said, she really doesn't want an episiotomy. And he said, I will do one if I damn well please. I'll never forget those words. He said it just like that. I will do one if I damn well please. And that instinct just overcame me like a mama bear. And I literally put my bare hand between his scissors and the perineum. And I said, if you're going to cut her, you're going to have to cut through me to get to her. And he put the scissors down. And then a few days later, he actually contacted the mom to get my contact information and said he was bringing midwives into his practice. He was so impressed. So I think my work, in some ways, that's almost like a personification of my work, that And the older I get, the more comfortable I get taking on that role of where is the unspoken suffering happening, and how can I find ways to help what's unspoken be spoken when it needs to be, help to find those connections between people's traumatic experiences and their superpowers. Like mine has a shadow side. I had this powerful experience of using high achievement to get out of a difficult situation, but sometimes achievement can be my shadow side that dogs me, in terms of like feeling like I have to perform or be a perfectionist. And I don't know exactly why women's health as opposed to other health, but I do women and children's health. When I went to college that first semester, I got exposed to alternative medicine. Now, this was 1981. There wasn't a term alternative medicine. It was either you're in or you're out, right? There was some little bit of meditation, acupuncture had come to the US, but it was really, really fringe. And I got exposed to psychedelics and meditation and nature and organic farming and organic eating and midwifery and herbal medicine. And I think it was that hook between ecology, feminism, women's spirituality, and the significant abuses that women have experienced historically in medicine. And keep in mind, in 1981, it was still legal in the state of California and several other states to do a forced sterilization on Black and Latino women without consent. You could just do a sterilization, you could do a hysterectomy at birth. So these were very formative pieces for me. It was still really at the cusp between the early feminist self-help, sit around in a circle and use your speculum to explore your cervix in your mirror. I didn't do that, but I was kind of like the next generation after that. So I was in Boston, I was in Cambridge, I was in Western Massachusetts, very influenced by that early movement. And so it really has become my life passion. I'm also a mom of 4 grown children. My kids are 27 to 36. I have 2 grandchildren who I had the absolute delight of midwifing at home. And I've written a bunch of books. I do some adjunct teaching.
You didn't first go to medical school.
Mm-mm.
So
No, I didn't.
I think this is really interesting. I want to emphasize this because I want to encourage people who are watching us, particularly young women, that the path doesn't have to be A to B to C to D. The path can really be a path that suits who you are and what you grow into. So if you could say a little bit about that path, I think it'd be.
I would love to.
Encouraging.
Yeah. So, it wasn't until much later that I read Joseph Campbell's work about, kind of trusting in your path. One of my favorite quotes is the Rumi quote, "What you are seeking is also seeking you." And I think there's a lot to say about really trusting what's calling us and listening when we can. And if you don't have that calling, that's okay too. But to experiment with things that excite you. When I went off to college at 15, I was the youngest person in my class and one of the youngest people there. And very quickly, I met a young man who handed me a copy of Spiritual Midwifery and introduced me to psychedelics and cannabis at the time. And I then very quickly found a midwife who is one of the most respected Black midwives in the United States. She took me on to teach me about prenatal care and childbirth education.
What drew you? Explain to most of our viewers. I mean, I know Spiritual Midwifery and Ina May Gaskin, the author, but what struck you about that book, getting it as a young woman?
I think it was a constellation of things, but the real pivotal piece for me, there is, as you know, Jim, a psychiatrist named Stanislav Grof. Stanislav Grof is a Czechoslovakian psychiatrist who did a lot of the early research on LSD psychotherapy and is the one who is not really credited, but really started to look at the impact of birth experience on how we sort of form it, almost like the formation of our foundational emotional and psychological selves happens in how we experience birth. And I think that some of what he says is a little bit overly simplified. I don't think it's that simple. But when I was 15 years old, the same person who handed me the copy of Spiritual Midwifery happened to he was the child of an academic in New York, feminist progressive academic in New York and himself a seeker, gave me a copy of a paper, a journal article called The Perinatal Roots of War. And in it, and now keep in mind, I have now grown dreadlocks. I'm smoking weed. I'm living in the mountains of Massachusetts, going to college, surrounded by liberal progressives. And I read this paper. I've gone vegetarian. I'm like wearing Chinese slippers made of cotton because I'm not going to, I'm learning about the military, industrial, chemical complex and organic farming and the pharmaceutical industry. I'm learning all these things, right? Which at the time, I think a lot of people would have thought were conspiracy theories or crazy, but actually have all been more than borne out to be quite accurate. And so this paper comes along that basically postulates that how we're born sets the tone for how we live, not just individually, but collectively and globally. And he talks about birth, obstetric violence, and birth trauma as a result of obstetric violence, and how this literally could shape a culture. And even as I'm saying it, I'm kind of getting chills, because between that and getting handed this copy of Spiritual Midwifery, I really had this moment of like, well, if what we can do is change pregnancy and birth to be a healing experience and a liberating experience and an empowering experience, and this has an impact on culture, how more upstream could I possibly get? And I'm like, this is what I love. And then I combined that with learning herbal medicine. To me, it was, keep in mind also the backdrop of this is we're 1981, right? There's a nuclear arms escalation happening between the US and then Soviet Union. I'm, again, living in this kind of hippie alternative mindset. And I got very much into kind of being back to the land. So I learned how to forage. I learned how to brain tan animal hides, make moccasins. I can actually, it's been a long time since I've done it, but I can actually forage fibers and make a fire by friction from just forage fibers. I have made fire by friction and lit fires and then cooked in an outdoor oven food that I foraged before. So, and at this time I was introduced to First Nations tradition, the practice of sweat lodge. I mean, a lot of different things were happening in my life that led to this really deeply committed life, that there are things that are happening to people and our planet as a result of capitalist enterprises, oppressive systems, racism, sexism, all kinds of isms. And there was this whole other way. And as part of that, also, it felt imperative to me, if there was going to be this nuclear arms escalation and some potential catastrophe. I mean, this is really how, I mean, I was 15, keep all this in mind, that I needed to learn all these things. And somebody had to deliver the babies. Somebody had to know how to grow or find the medicine. And so I became deeply committed to that. And that set me on my path. So when I was 15, I started college. When I was 16, I left college and apprenticed myself to a midwife. I studied herbal medicine. There were like 3 books on the market. So I was literally contacting herbalists that I heard of around the country and interviewing them and asking them questions. I apprenticed for some years as a midwife and then started practicing. And it was an amazing and has been an amazing path. And sometimes people say, oh, you switched careers and went to medical school. And it's not. It's like a golden thread. Because when I went to medical school, it was really to add a voice of culturally sanctioned authority to what I was doing and teaching. You know, very few people will question what a Yale MD says. You should, but very few people will question what a Yale MD says the way they might question a midwife or an herbalist's, the accuracy or veracity. And so I was wanting to really influence cultural change even more and really influence how people experienced medicine when they did have to go to the doctor. Because ultimately, 15, 20 years in, some of the things that we do, you and I, Jim, and others do, meditation, herbal medicine, started to become a little bit more centered in the mainstream. But the attitudes and philosophies, the inherent racism, sexism, fat shaming, body shaming of our culture and medicine itself weren't changing. So you could find a really cool midwife to go to if you wanted to have a a baby at home. But once you had to interface with the medical system, you were still in the same old, same old. If your kid got an ear infection in 1985 and you wanted to consider not using an antibiotic, which we now all know we should consider not using the antibiotic for run-of-the-mill ear infections in the kid, your doctor might say to you something like, do you want your child to go deaf or die? And moms would come to me crying, and here I was, an herbalist, midwife, and midwifery was illegal in most states. It still is in a lot of states in the United States, including the state that I grew up practicing in, Georgia. So it really was about going and becoming a bridge for those who needed medicine, but also becoming someone completely fluent in the language. I jokingly say sometimes at Yale I was a Trojan horse, but jokingly, not to infiltrate and break it down in a bad way, but to be able to present myself in a package that when I am speaking to physicians, that there's an understanding, I'm on their side, I'm really trying to make change, and they can hear and believe what I say. And that's been a really powerful tool for advocacy for patients, but also, I mean, just for example, a few weeks ago, I gave a lunchtime legislative talk to the state in the United States that has the highest maternal and infant mortality rate in the country, about the need to really have a change of how things are done there. So it's almost allowed me to amplify my voice in a way. So that's been the path. I'm still the same hippie herbal midwife. I don't do the psychedelics anymore and stuff because it just wasn't great for my constitution, but that stopped long ago. And I had, got pregnant and had kids and all of that. But honestly, the core philosophies are exactly the same and still very much how I'm committed to living and the work I do. So I spent almost 25 years practicing as a home birth midwife and an herbalist. And I ran the National Herbal Organization for a decade and a half and created the first peer-reviewed herbal journal in the United States. I created the integrative medicine department at Yale when I was there. And honestly, I love what I do. And I would say the only times I've gone wrong in any kind of career decisions are when I haven't really trusted my core, that soft belly breathing, that tapping into that quieter space is so important in, do I go right? Do I go left? Do I stay where I am? And I really do believe in trusting what we love, and I think that's what Rumi means. What we seek is also seeking us, that there's that meeting of who we are and what lights us up and what turns us on. And service for me is a huge piece. I feel a tremendous responsibility for whatever reason, for my planet, for the people I can reach and serve. And so that has continued to be a big commitment. And I think that's where teaching comes in more, because I can reach so many people when I teach.
So, Aviva, what you've done is you have followed that golden thread. I think that's really important for those particularly young people, but for everyone who's watching, is to pay attention to the directions in which you're drawn, the interests you have, and also let that commitment help you move through whatever fears or uncertainties.
Yes. And, I want to say to that, Jim, when I was in my mid-30s, I went to a dear friend's wedding, and I met her dad. Her dad was passed away now, but a Scottish gentleman. He was actually the Scottish ambassador to India, a very elegant man wearing a kilt at the wedding. And he said, so Chantal, my friend's name, said, you're thinking of going to medical school. And I said, I am, but I will say I'm a little nervous. I've got 4 kids. I'm already 35. I'm going to be, 40 something when I get out. And he said, I'm 81 years old. And when I was 50, there was something I really wanted to study, and it would have taken me 2 years of going back to school. And I said to myself, why would I do that? Like, why take on the expense? Why bother? Who am I to do this at this age in my life? And he said, and I could have done it. And he said, you know what? I don't regret that I didn't do it, but because my life is wonderful. But if I had done that, I would have been doing what I dreamed of doing for 30 years now. And that really, really stuck with me. Like, never be afraid to reinvent yourself at any time. And I mean, I took calculated risks. It costs a fortune to go to medical school. I had to stop making money on the side. Like I told you, I come from a housing project, not a trust fund. My husband doesn't have a trust fund either. So, I mean, there were opportunity costs in it, as people call them, deferred income, deferred work, taking on the expense of medical school, the time. But wow, what a journey it was and has been. And it's all made sense.
And what you have done, and again, this is an example of what is possible for people, for physicians and others, is you're bringing together these different interests, these different commitments, and you're really embracing a medicine that is including elements of other cultures as well as modern science, and you're bringing them together in the way you practice and the way you think and what you're writing. And what I do is to focus a bit now on your latest book, on Hormone Intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And why did you write the book, and what are we don't have time to go through the whole book. I recommend that people go through the whole book, but
Please.
What are the highlights? What are the basic principles, and what are perhaps surprising insights that you have in the book that you could share with the people who are watching us now?
Yeah, so Hormone Intelligence just happened as an accidental title. It was a title of a chapter because I had been reflecting on this idea that we're taught, and men are taught, that women's hormones make us irrational. If you're having an emotional day, men historically have said, "What, are you on your period?" This idea that our hormones make us unpredictable, irrational. I mean, we shouldn't have a woman president because who would want someone with, unstable hormones with their finger on the button, so to speak? All these things that are said, right? And yet the reality is that our hormones have we as women, as human beings, have a very innate and very deep intelligence. Our hormonal pathway kicks in our brain at a certain point when we enter puberty. We have, once our cycles start to get a little bit regulated, we have very predictable hormonal flows that happen monthly throughout each life cycle through pregnancy that are very similar human to human, woman to woman. And so to me, hormonal intelligence is a noun that we actually have this deep innate intelligence. It's also a verb because as women, we're not taught to pay attention to our cycles, to pay attention to our bodies, to make meaning of these very powerful, what are called chemical messengers, right? When we define what a hormone is, what's the first thing we say? It's a chemical messenger. But what are those messages? So hormone intelligence is learning to live in alignment with those messengers. The reason I wrote the book now is that, I started the book before the pandemic that we're living through right now. But the original title of my book was going to be The Hidden Hormone Epidemic, because 1 in 6 women goes in for a fertility consultation now because she's having trouble getting pregnant. 1 in 8 women has polycystic ovary syndrome. 1 in 10 women has endometriosis. 80% of women will have a menstrual concern or symptom significant enough that they go to the doctor for it. And at least 30% of women have heavy periods or painful periods that each month keep them from going to work or going to school.
30% women?
Yep. Well, at some
periods that are keeping them from easily living their ordinary lives.
Exactly. And we know that this actually has an enormous impact on women's economic potential. Women's, you're missing work. You don't go to work 2 days a month. Someone else is going to get that raise or that promotion, or is going to be seen as the person who's more hungry for it. We know, for example, we talk about the opioid crisis. Almost half of women who have endometriosis are at some point prescribed an opioid for the pain.
So explain a little bit about what endometriosis is.
Yeah, so endometriosis is a hormonal and immunologic condition in which tissue that normally lines the uterus actually becomes abnormal in its responsiveness to hormones and its responsiveness to the immune system, and also starts to grow outside of the uterus. So as a woman menstruates each month, that tissue also is shedding blood and can cause significant pain, irritation, but also scarring. that can affect fertility. It can cause a lot of difficulty with bowel movements, urinary symptoms, painful sex. It can be really debilitating enough pain that a large number of women are prescribed a narcotic. But a large number of women who are prescribed a narcotic are also prescribed an anti-anxiety medication called a benzo at the same time. So we've all heard about the opioid crisis. We've all heard about the risk of increase of overdose deaths. 10 women who are prescribed an opioid and a benzo at the same time have a 10 times increased risk of an accidental overdose death, but nobody talks about this. So we had this hidden hormone epidemic going on before the pandemic. It will exist after.
You're saying that these conditions, polycystic ovaries, endometriosis, sort of heavy or irregular or disabling periods, these are all
fibroids.
Okay.
Yeah, they're really significant. And the problem is further that because of stigma around talking about our reproductive and gynecologic health with each other as women, also with our doctors' lack of knowledge about these, and doctors' lack of comfort in talking with women about reproductive and sexual health means that it's hidden. And so a lot of women are living with this silently and suffering. A lot of women just assume it's normal because, hey, ever since the Bible, we've heard it's normal for women to suffer pain with, our reproductive health. And so I'm at the front lines, right? I see patients who are women, and women primarily come to me for hormonal and autoimmune conditions, other things as well, but those are the biggest. And so I'm hearing women struggling with this year after year after year. We know that on average, let's just think about endometriosis. It takes on average a woman 9 years in the United States of going from doctor to doctor. It's 9 years and 5 doctors on average, at least, to get a diagnosis of endometriosis, because so many women are told, oh, it's painful periods, that's normal. Take some Motrin, go on the pill. So I hear it from my patients. I also have 100,000 followers online in a very active community that communicate with me. And I listen because I read my own social media posts and write my own social media posts and listen to my own emails. And the number of women who are struggling silently, not knowing what's normal, not knowing what's not normal, suspecting something might not be right, trying to get answers. And then when they do get answers, if they do, they're often the first thing, Maslow said, if all you have is a hammer, then you see everything as a nail. Abraham Maslow said that. And, Jim, as physicians, psychiatry is probably a little different because you're taught to listen to your patients. But in general, with women's health, we're really taught medication surgery. And while I am all about appropriately used medication and surgery, there are other answers, right? Meditation for pain, journaling for pain and trauma, botanicals, supplements, dietary shifts, lifestyle shifts that really can make a huge difference. So the book.
So what if you're a woman who is having difficulty with her periods, having significant pain? What should she do? How can you give her a pathway that won't keep her, sort of waiting painfully for answers that are inadequate?
So the first thing, like in the book, there are a lot of questionnaires. So one, it can help you say, is this sort of typical period pain that still needs to be addressed? Or is this something more? Is this period pain because I have endometriosis or something called adenomyosis or chronic pelvic pain? So it helps you find where you are on the sort of trajectory of like completely normal, but I didn't know that was normal, to, oh, wow, something is really going on. Phew, I can actually put myself in this diagnosis and say, this sounds like what's going on. Of course, confirm it with a physician or midwife. But then let's say we find out it is period pain that isn't being caused by some underlying medical condition. We know that period pain can happen for a number of reasons, but the most common is an elevated level of inflammatory chemicals in the body. This is well known medically. But medically, we treat it with anti-inflammatory drugs, ibuprofen, NSAIDs of other kinds, which I have no problem with, except for the fact that they do have collateral damage sometimes. You can get stomach bleeding. 10 days of anti-inflammatory drugs in a row have been shown to reduce women's ovulation. So not so great if you're trying to get pregnant. They can affect your gut, leaky gut. So what I like to do is say, look, if you are having painful periods, don't wait for the herbs or the dietary changes to kick in. It's okay to use the ibuprofen for now. If you have to go in and take a board exam or do a job interview or whatever it is, don't suffer through. Go ahead, take the ibuprofen. But while you're doing that, let's shift your inflammatory state with changing your diet. We know that women who eat fish and vegetables more and red meat less, 2 months, you can see a significant reduction, if not complete elimination of menstrual pain. We know that ginger, the herb ginger, taken in capsules, 500 milligrams 4 times a day, so 2,000 milligrams a day, has been shown to be as effective as NSAIDs in relieving pain with none of the side effects. So
these are non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs.
Correct, exactly. So, and then also things like soft belly breathing. There have been studies that have shown that certain yoga positions can significantly relieve period pain. Applying heat can significantly relieve period pain. So if it's a Saturday and you can be home from work and hang out and do some yoga and put on a heating pad and do some meditation instead of popping the ibuprofen, that's wonderful. And then while you're doing those things in the short term, you're working on the dietary shifts. And we know that, for example, women who sleep more poorly not only have more period pain because there's more inflammation, but also have lower threshold for tolerating it. So working on the other root causes that can support. So the book really is an introduction to our bodies and our hormones. There's a beautiful chapter, in my opinion, on tapping into your own inner wise woman and really accessing a deeper healing potential that we haven't been taught to access in our culture generally. And also how to advocate for yourself when you do go to the doctor and you do need help and you might not be getting the answers. Then there are 6 chapters on diet, sleep, stress, gut healing, making sure that your body knows how to metabolize your hormones if you have excess hormones, a chapter on supporting ovarian health. And then there's a whole third section of the book, which I call the advanced protocols. So if you do have PCOS or you're going through difficult menopausal symptoms, or you do have heavy periods or uterine fibroids, there are actually strategies that are very targeted that you can add to the core plan to augment that. So the very specific, like you learn what, the ginger or whatever it is to use. And then, of course, as you know, from being at my house many, many times, Jim, I love to cook. And there are 5 weeks of meal plans that are done for you, and all my recipes that are all from my kitchen, except for 2, which I borrowed with permission. And that's the book.
So Aviva, somebody's reading the book, woman's reading the book. She does the questionnaires, and that will give her a sense, as she fills those out, a sense of what's actually going on, what's causing the symptoms. Exactly. And then does the book provide a basic programs of self-care, and how does it relate to what a woman is or is not doing with her physician?
So first of all, I'm a true believer in the partnership or the marriage of, it's not either or, it's not integrative or natural medicine or medication or pharmaceutical or physician care. So the book is very clear, like, here's when you do need to go see your doctor. Here's what's important to get, an actual diagnosis of. Here are the pharmaceuticals, right? I also say, look, ibuprofen is phenomenal for heavy bleeding and pain. It's just that we don't want to live on it all the time, and it doesn't take away the problem. So, the root causes. So it really is very integrated, and you can bring the book. And I think part of the beauty of why I went to medical school is that you can bring the book to your doctor, or, highlight something and say, hey, yeah, no, I didn't get my degree on Dr. Google, my medical degree on Dr. Google. I actually got this information from a Yale-trained physician who is saying, maybe I want to consider this before I do that. I mean, just for example, One survey that was done a few years ago of primary care physicians found that 70% of them had no idea how to diagnose endometriosis. And those who did had no idea how to treat it. There was a big study that came out of Michigan some years back that found that, so what we know is that there is an enormous overuse of hysterectomies in the United States. Half of all women over 55 will have a hysterectomy at some point in her life. It's really astonishing.
Sorry, say that again, please.
Half of all women over 55 will have a hysterectomy in her life. They're so overused. It's one of the top surgeries performed. That and cesareans are two of the top surgeries done in the United States. And we know that at least 35% of them are completely medically unnecessary. We also know that most doctors do not tell women that there are alternatives. And I don't mean alternatives like herbs and meditation. I mean like non-surgical medical alternatives. So this study in Michigan, it was a multi-center study. There were over 5,000 case reports looked at, and the number of unnecessary hysterectomies was astonishing, but also in women in their 30s who had had them and not been told that they could have something like a pharmaceutical or
women
a different
who were in their childbearing years.
Yes, who had never been told. So I think it really is important to work in conjunction with your physician, but it may be that your physician doesn't know these things because we were never taught these things in medical school. But by bringing the information to your physician, they might also get enlightened that not only there are other ways, but that, hey, my patients are actually looking for something different. So let me learn more. So you can totally, this is not an either or book. It's also not a quick fix book. It's not one of these, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, as I say in the book. It's really about a lifestyle. It's really about looking at the things that are within our control within the world that we live in. So we can't control everything that we're getting exposed to environmentally, whether that be stress as an environmental toxin or actual environmental toxins. But there are things that we do have within our control that we can support and nourish to help bring our bodies back a little bit more into, not to sound biologically reductionist, but a little bit more in alignment with nature's plan for us, which is pretty harmonious.
So I want to move on. Recommending the book as a wonderful source of information and understanding and tools and techniques, and emphasizing what you're saying is look at the book, see what you can do to present some of these new perspectives to the physician you're working with.
Yeah.
But Aviva, you're also working to train physicians. I know you're working with us, you're on our faculty, our food as medicine faculty. What are you seeing? What are the possibilities? Because this is a huge thing, that it's an uphill battle for women with their physicians, with the level of misunderstanding and or ignorance that physicians have about some of these issues. How do you see things moving ahead with medical students, with physicians, and changing the way people practice, and particularly practice in relationship to women's health?
Well, I think a few things are happening, Jim. One is that a lot of physicians themselves have become disenchanted when they have a health issue that comes up. They're seeking outside the box. And so that's expanding people's horizons just by their own experience, their own lived experience. They're shifting what they're open to sharing with their patients and what they're offering. The other thing is and you and I have talked about this previously, the rate of physician burnout has gone up so much that physicians are more inclined to lean into even things like meditation or healthier lifestyle. And they're recognizing something's cracked in medicine and it's affecting them too. So I think as we see some of those shifts happening, we see a greater opening happening in medicine. Another thing that's happening is consumers, and meaning healthcare consumers, have more power than ever. So if we actually are speaking up to our care providers that we want something different, it will even from an economic perspective, it will start to shift things. And we've seen this with midwifery. Obstetricians didn't originally welcome midwives into the hospitals and to their doctors' offices, practices, because they wanted midwives. They did it because women were going to go somewhere else if they didn't bring them in. So there is some consumer demand that creates shift. I think another powerful thing that's happening right now between the Me Too movement, which is, I think it's at a lower hum. It's not as, on Time Magazine right now, but I think that opened a conversation about sexism and mistreatment of women, and certainly the upheaval that has so needed to happen with the deaths of Breonna Taylor and others, really pushing Black Lives Movement conversation to another level, will potentially, I think, create some important shifts in medicine, because medical schools are becoming more obligated to become more aware of implicit biases. And while those implicit biases have largely been around in systemic racism, it's hard to address that without also addressing systemic sexism. So I'm hoping that that continues to shift the conversation. I love to teach. I really, really just love those aha moments that students get. I also know that teaching, there used to be this TV commercial when I was a kid. It was for like Breck or Clairol shampoo or something, but I don't know if you remember it, but the screen would say, it was a woman and she'd say, I told 2 friends and they told 2 friends and so on and so on. And then the screen was filled with women talking about the shampoo. And I always think of that, because one-on-one with a patient is, to me, it's that really deeply human moment. It's also it's the sandbox that I learn and get to also try new things in and work in partnership with my patients. And it's always the deep stories of real suffering that I'm hearing that push me to be better at what I do and to add more value to the women I care for. But when I teach, I might teach 100 women or 1,000 women. Right now, I'm doing an online program that has almost 6,000 women in it for gut healing. I have a free program going online right now. We have 9,000 people enrolled in it. It's totally free, but it's around pregnancy and self-care and advocacy. And so the potential to change this, to create a sea change when you reach so many people teaching, is just greater than just the one-on-one. The other thing I would say is I'm really shifting my concepts around my medical practice and moving into a group practice model, because I find that when people talk with each other, when they share a similar concern, and I have patients who have many concerns that I've never experienced, but when I get a group of 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 women with the similar concern that they're facing, whether it's a healthcare problem or, a mental health challenge, it's a healthcare problem too, a hormonal problem, et cetera, the sum of what gets created with that empathy and the shared stories is so powerful. And it allows me to be in a teacher model and a guide model more than a fixer model, which sometimes people put doctors into, even when we try to not be in that role. I love it. I feel so fortunate to get to learn.
And of course, originally, whole idea of being a physician, a significant part of it is teaching, supposed to be teaching. But the other point that you're making, we don't have too much time left, so I want to cover 2 more topics anyway. We could go on for a long time, but I know we will in other venues. But one is, recently you came through the first part of our professional training at the Center for Mind-Body Medicine, which takes place, much of it, in a small group.
Yeah.
And could you say a little bit more about that group experience? Because what you're emphasizing is partly it's your role as a teacher, but also the power of a group and the power of sharing. Could you say a little more about your experience and why you feel that's so important?
Yes. I mean, I'm a talker, and I'm a Gemini talker. You know me. I could talk. We've hung out for hours. I can talk forever. For me, the power of the group is the listening and the opening up, and just hearing the breadth of other people's stories is a constant reminder to tap into my compassion and tap into When I say the word humility, I think really what I'm saying is receptivity and love. Like, to me, humility is a combination of that. And in the group that we were in, well, first of all, I mean, I've been a Center for Mind Body Medicine teacher for a number of years. Going in to the training for me was like understanding a whole new level of the organization. But to be able to be a student, right? I think when I'm in a group, I become a student of everyone in the group. And I think that, to me, hearing the stories, remembering the depth and diversity of the suffering and challenges of people's lives is at once expansive and kind of, I don't know what the word was, like meta-personal, but then on the other hand, it's so humanizing to also just bring me into my own self and say, yeah, you're just a person doing the best you can, like all of these amazing, wonderful people. And hearing people's stories of resilience, the stories of what they have gone through, their losses. And then also, we had such a skilled facilitator in our group to watch her grace and her beauty and her honesty and her generosity and her wisdom, and just to be bathed in that for 4 days was really healing. But also, as a student, I learned new things in how somebody navigates a group. So, I mean, we had first responders in that group. We had one gentleman who's a first responder who just was tapped out. He was exhausted, tapped out. I mean, first responder meaning like COVID first responder. He was like in charge of his state's COVID response, and a dad, and trying to be a dad at the same time as getting called out in the middle of the night because he also did emergency services. It's just, you just remember to me, it's like remembering the grace of humanity. And I think that's what I feel with every one of my patients too. It's also a powerful opportunity, I mean, meditation is about going deeper into ourselves, right? But there's also, the word I was looking for before is transpersonal. There's something personal that happens where you kind of experience this. I do, like a greater oneness. I don't know how else to explain.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly what it is. That connection to something way beyond yourself and way beyond each person's individuality.
Yeah, and it's a way, I think, for me as a doctor, but also as a teacher and being in groups, especially when I have the opportunity to listen, there is something so, I don't know, just like that reminder that your problems are real, and at the same time, you're not alone. And I think maybe that's not that I don't want to say there's beauty in COVID. There's been a huge amount of suffering in COVID. But I mean, this has been such a collective, universal, we're all in this together. And the group experience kind of creates a small microcosm of that shared love and hope for each other and support for each other.
That's beautiful, because that was actually the final question that you were responding to.
What's that?
What is, or what are the lessons from these last 15 months of COVID?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's been really about, valuing the people I value. But I think more than anything, just that reminder that life is precious, that my sleep is important for my immune health, my staying out of a stress response is important for my immune health. It's just given me perspective that has allowed me to be a little bit softer in myself and with myself and with others. I think for me, there's been a softness and a slowing down in a positive way.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
How about you, Jim? What would be one of your things that you feel?
I think very similar things. It's given me time to go inside and work through issues, difficult trauma from the past.
Yeah.
So the trauma of COVID has brought up in many of us past traumas as well. And for me, because I've allowed myself, I've been willing to suffer through that pain, it's also helped me move through the limitations that past trauma has put on me. So that's been it's been not always easy, painful often, but that sense, and I think the softening, and for me, it's okay, let me soften, And I'm doing soft belly breathing all the time. And so let me soften, let me experience this sadness, this anger, this fear, this anxiety, and let me see what it is and what I need to learn from it. And as I relax with it, I begin to gain some perspective on it. So I've been able to feel less guilty
Mhm.
for things that I'd even forgotten that I was guilty about before. I've definitely felt more connected to other people. And I think your experience in the group is the kind of experience I've been leading these groups. We've been having 6, 8, I don't even know how many 4-day trainings this last 14 months. And in leading the groups and being in the trainings, as I'm able to relax and soften with other people, I'm also able to work on myself and feel connections. And the other thing, and I don't know if you've done this as well, is I'm reaching out much more to other people. If somebody's comes into my mind a couple of times, I think, oh, I better call her, I better call him. And I do it, and I'm finding how welcome that call is and how much better I feel if I don't resist that inner voice. Maybe a little like the inner voice that was telling you, that you should be more connected to nature or you should be a midwife. That inner voice that is saying to me, reach out to that person, do this, allow your body to move in this way. So it's been very rich, at times terrifying. And I know you know that one of my brothers died at the beginning of the pandemic. There's a lot of sadness, but also a lot of grace that's come through it. And one of the graces is always just talking with you now and feeling our connection and feeling the ways that we're learning from each other, with each other, and sharing what we're learning and how important that is. We're going to have to close now. I want to recommend Aviva, first of all. Tune into what she's doing. Look at her courses, and look at this new book. Look at Hormone Intelligence. It's a beautiful invitation to learn about yourself, to make discoveries about many aspects of your life, and to find practical tools that you can use to understand and help yourself. And also to come back to our last point, that you're not alone. Some of those statistics, to understand that so many other women are going through having to deal with these kinds of challenges, I think is itself healing. You're
I think
not.
you asked me earlier, Jim, if there's any most important take-home point or aha is for women to understand that what is happening in our bodies and our hormones psycho-emotionally is not your fault. It's actually, who said it, that insanity is a sane response to an insane environment? It might have been one of the Marx brothers. Actually, I don't even know who said it, but what is happening in our body is a response to an environment that is sometimes in crisis, and that it's not your fault, but there are things that you can do to feel more at home in your body and also feel more empowered about your health and yourself as a woman too.
That's a beautiful message and a really good one to conclude with. We're going to sit and breathe together for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to close. So thank you, Aviva. Let's just sit, everyone relaxing. Breathing slowly and deeply, in through the nose, out through the mouth, with our bellies soft and relaxed. Feeling at home as we exhale and relax a little bit more with each breath, feeling a little bit more at home in our bodies. And as we relax and exhale, perhaps also feeling a little more connected to each other, perhaps to Aviva and me, perhaps to all the people whom you can't see who are listening or watching us, perhaps to other people in your world around you, just relaxing, feeling that connection to ourselves and to those others. And perhaps also as we breathe slowly and deeply and relax, feeling that connection to the larger natural world, which sustains us all. That world that first invited Aviva on the healing path, that is there for all of us. Thoughts come, letting them go, returning gently to soft belly, to our breath. Just a couple more slow, deep, soft belly breaths. Now opening our eyes, letting our attention come back in the room, on the screen, where I can see you, Aviva. Thank you again for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
Sharing yourself and sharing your work with me and with all of us. So, and thank you everybody for tuning in, and I'll look forward to being with you again soon. Bye-bye for now.